Clause 4, Design of Welded Connections, D1.1 changes, 2020 edition to 2025 edition.
Clause 4.3.2 CVN Toughness requirements. One of the changes in Clause 4 is the reorganization of the Charpy V-Notch, or CVN Toughness requirements. In the 2020 edition, all of the requirements were contained in a single paragraph. The 2025 edition breaks those requirements into two distinct paths, making it much easier to understand what the engineer must specify. The first path applies when toughness is satisfied by the filler metal classification. The second path applies when toughness must be demonstrated through WPS qualification testing. The technical intent hasn't changed very much, but the organization is much clearer. Key takeaway: the 2025 edition separates filler metal classification requirements from WPS qualification requirements. Engineers' responsibilities. The 2025 edition also provides much more specific direction to the engineer. If relying on filler metal classification, the contract documents must specify the required absorbed energy and the corresponding test temperature. If WPS qualification testing is required, the engineer must specify the test temperature, where the Charpy specimens are taken from, whether the weld metal, heat-affected zone, or both, and, if necessary, an alternate notch location for hazy testing. These changes remove ambiguity and make it much clearer what information must be included in the contract documents before fabrication begins. Key takeaway: the 2025 edition places greater emphasis on clearly defining CVN testing requirements during project design rather than leaving those decisions to the fabricator. New section: Base Metal, Filler Metal Strength Requirements. One of the biggest additions to Clause 4 is the introduction of an entirely new section on base metal and filler metal strength requirements. If you're familiar with the 2020 edition, this material simply wasn't organized this way. The 2025 code now formally defines matching, undermatching, and overmatching filler metals and explains when each may be used. This change is important because it connects filler metal selection directly to structural design. Instead of simply picking an electrode based on experience or habit, the code now provides a more structured approach that ties filler metal selection to the required strength of the welded connection. As we'll see, many of these requirements are based on the new Table 4.3. Key takeaway: the 2025 edition establishes a formal framework for selecting filler metals based on structural design requirements: matching, undermatching, and overmatching. Let's take a closer look at the three strength categories. A matching filler metal is exactly what it sounds like. It provides the required strength for the base metal being welded. In many situations, this is the default choice required by the code. An undermatching filler metal has a lower tensile strength than the matching filler metal. The code allows its use in certain situations, but only when specifically permitted by Table 4.3. If an undermatching filler metal is used, the engineer must base the design calculations on that lower strength. Finally, we have overmatching filler metals. These have a higher tensile strength than the matching filler metal. While the code allows their use, it does not assume the connection suddenly becomes stronger simply because a higher strength electrode was used. Key takeaway: matching, undermatching, and overmatching are now defined terms, and each has specific design implications. Design implications. This is probably the most important concept in this section. Many people assume that if they use a stronger electrode, they've automatically created a stronger weld. That's not how AWS D1.1 approaches structural design. The 2025 edition makes it clear that the required filler metal strength comes from Table 4.3. If an overmatching filler metal is used, the design strength of the connection is still based on the matching filler metal. On the other hand, if an undermatching filler metal is permitted and used, the lower filler metal strength must be used in the design calculations. The goal is consistency. Structural capacity is determined by the code requirements, not simply by selecting the strongest electrode on the shelf. Key takeaway: stronger filler metal does not automatically increase the design strength of the welded connection. Instructor commentary. So what does all of this mean in the real world? For most fabricators, not much changes day to day. Most shops have been selecting matching filler metals for years, and they'll continue to do so. Where these revisions really matter is for engineers, WPS writers, and anyone responsible for developing welding procedures. The code now provides much clearer guidance on when undermatching filler metals are acceptable and how overmatching filler metals affect design calculations. For CWI candidates, I wouldn't spend a lot of time memorizing every sentence in this section. Instead, understand the concepts, know the definitions, and remember that overmatching filler metal does not automatically increase the allowable design strength of the connection. That's the big takeaway from these revisions. Key takeaway: the major change is a clearer engineering framework for filler metal selection and structural design, not a dramatic change in everyday shop welding.